So the machine that we're going to take a look at is called Querier. Querier. The name already implies that something has to do with queries. So we'll see. What I normally do, or what I do, is I create a directory for a machine so that I can store stuff in this directory. And when I have to come back to it later, I have all the stuff that I needed or I got from the machine in one handy spot. So when we start, it's empty. I already have a small script, which basically is the scan thing that we see in starting point. It's quite useful. What it does first, it does a really quick nmap scan of the machine with all ports, but it does not run any scripts or identification stuff. So it's really nice and fast. And then stores the, I will click it off so because it takes a little while. And then it stores the ports that it finds. It does some stuff with it on the command line and makes it one nice, neat little string. Puts it in an environment variable, as we see here. So it has ports 135 through 499671. And then only runs scripts and identification on those ports. As a total, it makes the entire process of scanning a machine much simpler, easier on the computer or easier on the network, or just faster in general, because it does not try to do it on every single port that it finds and stuff like that. But just from the get-go, it has some very interesting things. We see the first couple of ports, 135, 139, and 445. If you've done a couple of scans before and ran into Windows machines, you know that these 3 ports are generally connected to something called the SMB file sharing. There we go, noise. We have lots of stuff. Port 1433, if you've never done Windows machines or have not done any corporate networks, you might not know it, but for 1433, I'll scroll through here. 1433 is actually the SQL server from Microsoft. In this case, there's one connected to it, and it already shows a lot of very interesting information. Most of the information is, of course, the domain and the computer name, which we already know, querier.hdb.local. But version information is quite useful. There's some SSL stuff going on. But for sure, the SQL server, as the name implies, has to do something with queries. It is one of the first things we'll look at. First, SMB is always the go-to thing, and then I'll take the SQL server. What else is here? A port 5985. If anything you take away from today's meeting is that port 5985 is called WinRM, is used for WinRM, and that's basically remote management of Windows machines. It will be really neat. We'll take a look at that. And all the higher ports, they're due to RPC stuff. Generally, unless there's something else like, then Windows RPC will not take care of those. So we'll not look into those. So for us, what is interesting here are the SMB machines ports, the MS SQL port, and WinRM, which might give us, if we find some credentials, a way in, which will be awesome. So let's take a look at SMB. I'll clear my screen. One tool that I like to use is called SMB Map. It's generally a lot faster, but does not work all the time. and you hear a ambulance going around the house now, and it's gone. All right. SMB map, it does not show anything. Uh, we can try with an empty username, and depending on your in-packet version, this works or not. In this case, it does not. So that's kind of sad. Another tool to use is SMB client. We can use it to list stuff. And the minus capital L will actually list things. If we run it like this, it will ask for password. I don't have a password, so that is useless. We can Control C that. But there is a option, if we look at SMB clients help, on the under authentication options, we can use something called -N for no pass, generally also known as a null session. So it will try to make a connection to the SMB share without actually providing any authentication stuff. And if we do that, it actually lists shares. So that is really neat. We actually see 4 shares. One is called reports, which is different than the default ones. So that's immediately interesting. And we have the admin $C and IPC $. We can give those all a try. So we know SMB client will actually work for some part. Another tool that we can use is enum for Linux, which will actually work on a Windows machine, does enumeration on Windows machine. If we give the IP address, it will try stuff. Generally, I find it to not work really well anymore, I guess. Most services have better tools to enumerate the Windows machine, but sometimes it just works. As you can see now, it just has a whole bunch of errors and not very useful. So from the 3 tools, we actually have SMB clients that actually does stuff. So we can use SMB client to actually connect to the shares as well. So let's first try the $C and see if we can use the null session to actually connect to that. Working with Windows is also a test of your patience because it takes a little while. X denied. We also had an admin thing, also X denied, and an IPC. Yeah, it has nothing in it. And the other one was reports. It immediately drops us into an SMB-like prompt. Help will show the help, or all the information about commands that it knows. Generally, it knows things like dir. And in this case, it lists a file, currency volume report.xlsm. XLSM is, I believe, the macro thing extension for Excel. So let's get this file. Of course, there's spaces in it because Windows people love spaces. I don't know why, but we need to double quote it. So get it and retrieves it. Very good. Now, if you were here for the reversing presentation, you know several commands to use on unknown files. If not, I highly recommend it. It was a very neat session. But one of the commands that we talked about was the command file. And if we run that on the currency volume report.xlsm, it will say that it's a Microsoft Excel file. Thank you very much. We already know this due to the extension, but it's good to be reminded of it. And a really neat thing about Office files basically is that they're actually zip files. if you ever wonder why your machine is slow on a 100 kilobyte Word document or Excel file, try unpacking it with zip. I had one colleague who managed to get 3 gigabytes of data in a couple of megabytes of a file. And he was wondering why his computer was slow, but all his memory went to that Excel file. So using unzip -L for listing, we see that there's actually data in this file. As it will not extract to a really neat directory, I'll make one, make their Excel stuff. I'll go into Excel stuff and unzip the file here. Great, neat. So if we do a ls, we'll see that there's different files, different directories. So the Excel file is basically just XML files, which who would have figured. What is interesting here, the first thing that jumps to mind is this VBA project. VBA stands for Visual Basic for Applications. So I'm thinking this is a thing that is used to actually do stuff like an automation of things. So if we do a file on it, VBA project, I will do it on top of the screen. It says that it's a composite document file, V2, blah, blah. If you put this in Google, it will tell you to look at something called Ole tools. Ole tools. On Kali, this is quite clean Kali installation. So I had to actually do some installation of tools for this to actually work. I believe it's pip3 install Ole tools, or maybe it was pip install. Already satisfied, yeah. So pip3 install Ole tools, which is the technology that Microsoft uses to actually exchange data between things. It's really neat. We get some really neat stuff that we can use in our investigation. I believe it's called Ole VBA or VBA Ole. Yeah, there we go. So when we run that, Ole VBA, we get to actually see everything that is in this file, which is really neat. There's all, we can see that it does something with connection strings, and we have some credentials here, the user reporting and a password that seems to be valid for the database because it's a database query, of course. And what does do here, it says select star from volume, and then it creates the sheet. Now, if you don't want to install the Ole tools, which is quite understandable and stuff, the other thing that we learned from reverse engineering is the strings tool that we can use. Strings, I will limit it to strings longer than 15 characters, so we don't get everything. Also outputs all the things that we need, but without the context that it has. So we see the select star from volume, connection successful. We see a select star from version thing, and this line that says, hey, I have this user and password. I will copy this line because awesomeness. There we go. I would like to say that I do not see the chat at the moment. So if there's any comments, questions, just shout them out, and then we'll I will answer them. And if not, then also fine. So I will create. I will open up my favorite cherry tree because we love cherry tree and we do not like that it will disappear in the next Kali version, right? We have, I don't have a new instance. Thingy-majingy, and we call it Meetup. Zoom in, right, there we go. So we have some creds. Let's see, reporting with a password. And this is always good stuff because we know there's a database server and we know a user. So let's give it a try to connect to it. I will already copy the password because I can type reporting. Go back to my directory. One thing to know is that the in-packet library framework already has like a MS SQL client, client.py, and it is somewhere stored in the documentation. This directory, uses shared doc Python 3 in-packet examples, is full of stuff that you actually want to use. So yeah, I would suggest to actually put it in a path somewhere so you don't have to do what I'm doing now. Python 3 in-packet, there we go, examples and a SQL client. Let's see if it will run. It fails with an error. This is due to the general Python 2 versus Python 3 problem. I'll hit it again with Python 3 and then it actually works. Zoom out a little bit. This client is actually very useful. It is a basic interface for MS SQL with a lot of tools that you can actually use on your MS SQL server. It's not very hard to use. It just needs a username and password. So the target is a username at the IP address, and that should be enough. So let's give that a try. Reporting at 10.10.10.125. There we go. It will ask for password, and it says failed. One thing to remember is that there's different ways to authenticate on Windows. If one fails, try the other versions that it has. One of the optional arguments is this Windows out thing, whether to use Windows authentication. And Windows authentication is actually default for MS SQL Server. And by God, I don't know why they set it to false, because it's actually default setting. So we'll try that out. And once we do that and we enter the password, it will actually connect. So don't despair if it fails. And now we can actually query the database. Let's see if we can do something like help. Help already has some convenience functions, basically. It allows us to start something called XP command shell, of which the description is, you know what it means. It's like saying, like, you know what you did. But in case you don't know, XP command shell is the thing that allows you to execute commands on the computer or on the operating system from within your SQL server. And some programmers use it in their applications to actually outsource computing tasks to another process. But from an attacker perspective, it's like a gold mine and like this gold nugget that you find if you can enable it, because then you can fully interact with the underlying system. The only thing that it requires is that we become or that we are sysadmin on the SQL server, and that we have enough rights to actually enable the XP command shell. So what we can do is we can ask in what role we are, or specifically if we have the role that we want. So is server role member? Oh, I was just going to brag that my typing was really well and then I mistyped something, right? Sysadmin, there we go. It says 0. 0 is false, so we're not sysadmin. So if we would run enable XP command shell, it will probably fail. And it already says the user does not have permission to perform this action. So, boohoo, we cannot do anything. Well, at this point, you would either give up and try something else, and then figure out that there's nothing else to try. So you get back to this point. When I first did this machine, I actually moved away and tried some other stuff, and then I remembered something else. In that we can use exec to can we, yeah, there we go, exec to invoke stored procedures or functions, and there's this function called xp directory that we can use to actually list shares. I wonder if we can say querier .htb.local. I did not try this, so well, it does not fail, but see colon? No. See? Maybe that was a mistake to do. But it says it actually gives some output, and that output is not bad. So we can use this function, and what that means, oh, there we go. What that means is that we can query a share somewhere. So, and if we would have a share ourselves, we can get it to query that. And what does that bring us? Well, whenever a user account actually queries a share on a different Windows machine, it sends along a hash to actually authenticate itself to it. And with that hash, we can do stuff, which would be really awesome. So how do we do that? Let's split my screen. I'm using tmux, so I can have multiple windows and we can see stuff working together. Highly recommend getting to know tmux. So if we do a locate for responder, we see that there's in another non-default location a program called responder is stored. If we hit that, the first error message is that it should be run as root, which is awesome. We just do sudo password, and the next thing it says, well, you asked me to do stuff, but I don't know what you want to listen to. On Kali, in Hack the Box, all our traffic is going through our VPN tunnel, and our VPN tunnel is actually called, if we do the IP address, it's called TUN0. So this is our actual VPN tunnel thing that we can use. So if we do, if we tell responder to listen to stuff on TUN0, then whatever comes to that port, which fits the spec that responder can talk to, it will interact with it. So when we start it, let's scroll up a little bit. It will say a lot of things. There we go. It has poisoners, which means that it will actually try to fool other clients on the network to do stuff for DNS and stuff like that. It has servers, so there's now a HTTP and HTTPS server running that can be used, but it also has an SMB server. So with the functionality in SQL Server to actually query SMB server, we can let it talk to responder, and then we can see all the interaction between the server that we're coming from and the responder session. And if all goes well, we should see a hash being exchanged between the two. And with that hash, we can actually do some brute forcing. Or you can attempt a pass the hash, I guess. But in this case, we'll do some brute forcing. So, having said that, let's give it a try. XX dir tree. And what we need is to give it a path, 14.7, and we'll call it hello hack the box, right? Because who doesn't love a long name? And so once we run this, the SQL server will actually set up a connection to our responder and start talking to it. And so we should see stuff happening in the bottom part of the screen. And if it fails, I just talked a lot for nothing. Build up suspense. Here we go. Ah, there we go. Yeah, yay. So it actually tried to connect. It said, well, there's nothing. But what did happen was that the NTLM v2 hashes got exchanged so that the client or the connector could authenticate itself with connectee. And in this case, this entire thing here is the thing we're after. We can copy this and we don't need responder anymore. So, well, that was the wrong thing to do. All right. Like I said, we don't need responder anymore. We'll go into our Meetup machine and Querier, right? And we'll open something called a hash, because that's a good name for a file with a hash in it. And we'll paste it. There we go. So the hash is in the file now, and we can see what's going on. Let's quit that. Thing is, we want to brute force it. I will make my screen a little bit bigger. We want to brute force it. One of the tools to use is John the Ripper, and that is located in user has been John. And it's an awesome tool. It has so many functions. But one of the things it needs, if we scroll up, is a word list. Word list =, file, so it needs to be a file. I don't know if it will allow for a gzip file, but the thing that I always do is I use the user share word list ROCU file. Generally in Hack the Box, this is one of the files which is quite default to use. And some of the newer challenges poke fun at it and they use a slightly different file. But yeah, it's okay. It comes gzipped on the machine. So if you don't have the rocu.txt, but you have the rocu.txt.gz, and then you need to gc-d it, gzip -d, user share word lists, rocu.txt.gz. And then you do that, and that will result in the unpacked file. And then we can use that. We can say user has been John, use this hash. We need to specify a word list equals and then a file name. One little trick thing that I do is do a space, and then I can use the tab completion, and then just go back and remove the space. And then while it does that, it goes through the entire rocu list and it tries to crack the hash. It should not take too very long. It's not like it's running on a very high GPU type thing. Right, there we go. If you get a lot of output of, hey, possibly this type of hash, hey, possibly this type of hash, then you have a space between the =, and the word list, and then tries to determine the hash for every line in the rocu file. And that will take a little while because that does not work. So we get credentials. Credentials, username, password. It should be the service account. So let's go into beautiful cherry tree. Cool. With a service account, we could do several things. Most of the time, you're not allowed to connect to using a service account. First thing I'll try is to actually use it to connect to the database again, because it's the database account. So let's see if that works. Yeah, OCD complete. There we go. Doo -doo -doo. Subs. There we go. Right. So that is success. So we logged into the SQL Server again. Let's see what role we have. Sysadmin. There we go. And we are sysadmin. So that allows us to actually say, enable the XP command shell. One important thing here, it says, blah, blah, run reconfigure to install it. So don't forget to actually run that. And what we can do now is to actually, XP command shell, we can run code or commands on the server, which is awesome, really neat. And so we can now do stuff. We could use maybe cert util to download a thing and put it on. But if there's like Windows Defender, that will not work because it will say, hey, cert util is a malicious tool. It's made by Microsoft, but it's actually used for malicious things. And so we'll block it, which is quite ironic. The thing that I like to do is I like to use a fileless reverse shell. And what do I mean by fileless reverse shell? Is basically running a PowerShell command that only runs in memory and does not write anything to the file system. So there's no trace of you doing it except for the command in the SQL Server if there's any logging going on. You obviously see some form of process running on the machine if you monitor that. And of course, there's the connection to the database thing or to the reverse shell that is connected. So what reverse shell should we use? There's actually a really nice set of shells and scripts that can be used in Windows environments. It's called Nishine. I don't know how you pronounce it. Nishine. But it has dismiss you. It has lots of things for bypass, man in the middle, stuff like that. Prasatak, stuff like that. But also shells. And shells from many different versions. I like to use the invoke PowerShell TCP.ps1. There's also one-line thing and UDP and stuff like that. But I like to use this. And what I do is I go back to Nishine. I take the code, I take the URL here, copy it, and then I'll do it like this. In my tools directory, I will clone it. So git clone and then put the URL. It will take an entire dump from the GitHub repository and put it on your local file system. Highly recommend it because sometimes GitHub is down and then you don't have anything. So having your own local version is very useful. So if we go into the Nishang directory, I pulled it down yesterday, I believe, so it's quite fresh. Go to into shells, and there's this invoke PowerShell TCP.ps1. If we do a lesson on it, there's actually really good documentation. And an example, the first example is actually what we want. We want to invoke a reverse shell. You can also set up a bind shell, but most of the time that does not work. So I don't hardly use that. But invoke PowerShell TCP reverse IP address, put an IP address in here and a port. We'll copy this because we'll need this string. We'll make a adjustment to this file. So we'll take a copy and we'll go to Meetup, Querier, and put it in our actual Meetup file slot here. So we have it in our directory and we can modify it and it does not reflect on other things that we want to try. And why do we want to do that? Well, we can ask PowerShell to download a file, to read its contents and immediately execute what is in it in one go, which is awesome. But this file, it will create functions that we can call, but it will not execute this function. It expects you to do that yourself. So what I always do, I edit this file, and then I go all the way to the bottom, Shift G, or capital G, goes all the way to the bottom in VI. And then I actually call the function that it actually created itself. So it's like kind of like Inception-like. We need to change the IP address. So if we, yeah, there we go. If we go to the top, it says I'm going to define a function called invoke PowerShell TCP. And then at the bottom, after it is fully defined, we actually call it. So once PowerShell reads this, it will first define this function, and then it will find a line, or the bottom line, that says, oh, just run it. And then it will happily run it for us. So the IP address is in here, and we have chosen the port 4444, because why not? So save it. And what we need to do is two things. We need to actually set up a netcat listener to actually get the data or the shell on our machine. So I will create a different view here, NLNVP 4444. So we'll listen. We don't do DNS lookups. We'll be for both and connect to a port. So netcat is listening now. And the other thing is that we need to have a place that we can put the file so that we can let it be retrieved by the machine that we're actually trying to hack. So we need a HTTP server, and Python 3 has a really neat HTTP server. There's like a million gazillion ones that we can use, but we'll just use http.server port 8080 and hit enter. So it will serve the current directory as a website, basically. So in our SQL server, we can now say, hey, XP command shell, let's see if it still works. Yeah, it still works. XP command shell, run PowerShell. We'll use the Internet Explorer thingy-majiggy. And with that, we'll ask it to create a new object from the library net.webclient. And with that, we can actually say download string. You first have to research this, then you get into some tutorials, and then you remember that there's actually two functions that you really like to use. One is download string and the other is download file. Download string, I would say double quote here, but since we're in the shell doing the XP command shell, we need to escape it. And then we can give it the URL, so 10.14.7:8080 invoke, I forgot the name, PowerShell TCP.ps1, I think. Right, I might have not have the right name, but we'll see. So we ask XP command shell to spawn us a PowerShell, which utilizes the IEX to create a new object for net web client, which downloads the string. Download string will actually go to our web server, retrieve the file, and whatever it retrieves, it will read and execute immediately in memory. And then it should give us a shell on the bottom right-hand side. And if I made a typo, it will yell at us. So let's see what happens. Oh. Hey, it's turned off. Enable, reconfigure. I think I made a typo somewhere. My new object. Oh. It did stuff. I guess IT crowd comes to mind when you say like, have you tried turning it off and on again? Just try it again. But in the bottom right hand side, I'll navigate to it. We see that we are actually greeted with a shell. If we do who am I? It is a beautiful shell. If we can navigate the file system and the SQL service, there we go. Almost there. Desktop. There we go. There's a beautiful user. Let's see if we can read it. User.txt measure object character. We can read it. It's 32 characters, so we know there's a hash in it. Beautiful. So yay, we get user hash. And then the big question becomes, what do we do now? What do we do now? Let's keep it desktop. One of the things that I like to do, most people have their own scripts or stuff that they like to use. I have also something that I like to use, which I drop on the machines, and it's called the privilege escalation awesome suite. It's very important or annoying. It's LinkedIn, so it's annoying. That's Pyro. Yeah. Okay, cool. The privilege escalation. Oh, I actually made a shortcut here because I was well prepared. The privilege escalation awesome suite. It's quite nice. It is a tool that is used in both Linux escalation of privilege and Windows escalation of privilege. So it's like a one-stop shop for your scripting needs. Again, this thing, copy the URL and clone it to your local directory. It has a really neat logo, the piece in the pod, and it does stuff. And it does stuff really well. And what I really like is that there is a really deep connection with the Hacktricks XYZ website. In case you don't know it, this website has a lot of information about privilege escalation, things to check, things to look at, other stuff to try. And if it finds something, it gives you an explanation of how it works, which is really neat. So do check that out. We'll use it now. So we do a copy here, go back to our shell, go back to the Python thingy here, cancel it. So if we go to my tools directory, and I already checked it out, but there we go. Normally you would do a git clone, put the URL here, and that gives you this directory on your file system. There's a Windows version and a Linux version. We're interested in Windows at this moment. So WinPiece, look at that. And there's two versions, a bat file and an exe file. I have never used the bat file. It might work really well, but I've never used it. I never had a use for it. I always use the WinPiece exe version. There we go. Look at me typing in there on the Linux system. What has happened? There's a bunch of directories again. If we do a tree, does it have tree? Oh, no, I'm not going to install it. Last time I did that, I had to wait 10 minutes because some trigger stuff. So WinPiece, ls, there we go. There's a bin directory. If you look through these directories, it's a little bit obfuscated, I was going to say. There's pre-built binaries. That's what I wanted to say. And one of them is an obfuscated release. I always go for the obfuscated release. It sounds cool. Generally, why would you obfuscate something is to not have it be detected. not being detected in the sense that Windows Defender can look at it or something else that looks at patterns and stuff like that. So finally, in this directory, there are 3 binary files, the x86, the x64, so the 32-bit and the 64-bit, and the any I don't care version. And the any I don't care version is the one that I always use. So again, I copy it, go to Meetup and go to Querier and copy it there. In case stuff changes, stuff works around or does other things, you always have a copy of that worked with that machine, which is really neat. So we already have quite some stuff in this directory. But there's this WinPiece any. We want to get that onto our remote machine. So we need a web server again. So in good Linux thing, I'll do the administrator thing of up and down. And I have a HTTP server again. It was probably faster to just type it, but there we go. So back in my tree painting, the top one is my SQL server, left one is my HTTP server, right one is the machine at this moment. So we'll zoom into that one. Yeah, and we are here. We have, I think we can actually write stuff here. So echo test into test. There. Yeah, it will actually do test. If you notice, you can use most Linux commands on Windows nowadays because they're better and Windows has taken them over. Would this work? No, that does not work. LS then? That works. All right, so we're here. I like to make a directory for myself, especially on these capture the flag boxes. Normally, if you don't want to get caught, put it somewhere else, of course, but on the capture the flag boxes where there's many people working on it, I would create my own directory. And what we want to do now is to transfer that binary, that WinPiece, onto this machine. And we can do that with PowerShell once again. We're in PowerShell already. On the top, on the left-hand side, already says PS. So we can do new, beneath new object. net.webclient. We don't need to use the IEX thing at this moment because we just want to download a file. Download file. A download file takes 2 arguments. The first one is the thing that you want to download, and the other one is the exact path where you want to write it and its file name. You cannot, as far as I know, use relative paths. So you need to say, well, I want to put it here. So we'll do that. We don't need to escape because we're already in PowerShell. So HTTP 10.10.14.7 port 8080 WinPiece any.exe. That's the thing that we want to download. Where do we want to put it? C colon. Let's see if this works. Users. MS SQL Service Desktop credmp/WinPiece any.exe. See, my OCD makes it that I need to have the exact same capitalization on both ends. Wonder if this works. Let's give it a try. That did not work. It is probably due to the quotes things. So let's fix the quoting. Net.webclient. Download file. You might notice that the error messages are not really useful when you're in the PowerShell TCP thing. On normal Windows, it would actually yell at you with different error messages. Let's type port 8080 WinPiece any.exe. Close that. Very good. C colon/ users MS SQL Service Desktop be WinPiece any.exe. There we go. It did not yell at me. I used the uh, forward slash instead of the backslash because else you need to escape your slashes, which is a pain in the ass. And if we look at the local directory, it will now have this win piece any. We can run this win piece any.exe. You put a dot slash and it will run the current binary in the current directory. If we run this, it will take a little while before there's output because it buffers everything and only outputs when it feels like it, which is when it is done. So we need to wait. I think I timed it at about like a minute or so it should not be too long. It should not be too long, but it's always very long when you wait for it, of course. Do, do, do. Oh, it takes so long. But WinPiece any, it will do a lot of checks. It will run through pretty much anything that you can imagine being a standard check in order to do privilege escalation, like running services, what programs are installed, are there passwords stored on in some files, are there forgotten auto installation files, or in the case of this machine, group policy files. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Yeah, it already gives away directly in the screen. It says cached GPP passwords, the group policy passwords. It actually has an administrator account, which is still there, and it already decoded the password. But let's take a look at all the things that it did, and then we'll use those things. So if we scroll up, you see there's a lot of stuff going on. It is a really neat tool. There we go. So for one, it has really good ASCII art, which is awesome. It has a legend. Red are stuff you need to look at. Green, cyan, and no, other stuff. Like I said, there are links to the Hacktricks website for pretty most of the things. So you can read about it. It's actually a very decent server environment, the 2019 version, so it's good. But it's Windows, and there's already a lot of CVEs that we can take a look at. I think there's like 3 or 4 ways to go from user to root, and we'll just do the simple one here, but we could try different CVEs and work on it. Total of 9. Well, then it lists a lot of things like labs and event forwarding, auditing, the environment, if there's any protections going on, credentials guard or LSA protection, which are really neat tricks that Windows offers, but most people don't have them enabled because they require Hyper-V to be running. Scene, environment variables, there we go. Stuff in the registry, HQ internet settings, the drives that are mapped. There's no antivirus going on. The UIC is enabled, prompt for non-Windows binaries. The users that are here, administrators 1, the SQL Server is 1, reporting obviously was 1 user. We did not find any other ones. Anything else? Well, there's a default username, administrator, yes. We have rights, access to stuff. And of course, all the services that are running that are not Microsoft. Modifiable stuff. There is the USO service, which is, well, there's an exploit for it, but I never had it run for me. So if you ever tried it, give it a try. But I have had very little experience, good experience with it. So in the end, after all this information that it shows, it will tell us that it found something really interesting, and that is the cache group policy passwords. Being for administrator, and the password is my uncles are Mario and Luigi. Copy that, put it in our creds thingy. Cool, cool, cool. We have that, we have creds, we are happy. So let's give the administrator thing a try. Go back to our shell here. We saw that the WinRM is actually open, the port. So let's give that a try. There is a very cool tool called Evil WinRM, and it's actually a gem. Gem install Evil WinRM. I believe it needs to be sudoed. Evil WinRM. There's also a really neat website, I believe. Evil WinRM. It's like a yeah. They call it the ultimate. It has really neat things like file upload and download and stuff like that. It also runs in memory and does things like the malware detection, bypass, stuff like that. Supports pass the hash. Really neat. Really good tool to have in your arsenal and really easy to use as well. So let's do that. Evil WinRM. Evil. There we go. On the IP 10.10.10.125 as user administrator. There we go. And then we just need a password. Password. Here we go. Wow. Enter password. And at this point, we are administrator. To go to desktop, there's a root. Root.txt. There we go. We can read it, and we have 32 characters, so we have the hash. And with that, we have fully owned this machine. We went from just having SMB with null sessions to having an Excel file, decoding that, looking at the Visual Basic for applications, getting some credentials from that, connecting to the database, using the database to get hashes by using the responder, decoding the hashes or brute forcing the hash for passwords, connecting back, then doing a fileless reverse shell using PowerShell. From there, what did we do? From there, we got entry, we downloaded the WinPiece, and WinPiece told us the stored credentials, and with that, we became administrator. So that's that machine.